You walk out into your garden on a warm morning in June. The tomatoes are standing tall. The basil looks untouched. The squash leaves are smooth and whole without a single chew mark. No aphids on the roses. No caterpillars on the parsley. No ground beetles crossing the soil. Just clean, quiet, perfect-looking plants. And for a moment, you feel proud. Finally, no bugs this year. Do not celebrate that, because what looks like a victory is actually one of the most alarming things a garden can show you. Today, you will understand why the most experienced ecologists and entomologists in the world do not want a bug-free garden, what has already started collapsing beneath your soil when insects vanish, and why that perfect silence is not a sign that something is going right. It is a sign that something has gone very wrong. Here's the part most people never hear. Insects are not visitors in your garden. They are not pests passing through on their way somewhere else. They are the infrastructure. They run pollination, decomposition, pest regulation, and nutrient cycling simultaneously. And they are the first link in a food chain that reaches all the way up to the songbirds outside your window. When they disappear, they do not leave a gap, they leave a cascade, and that cascade has been measured. In 2017, the Krefeld Entomological Society, a group of volunteer insect researchers based in North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, published one of the most cited ecological studies of the decade. Using standardized malaise traps deployed across 63 nature reserves over 27 years, researcher Kasper Hallmann and his team measured total flying insect biomass. The result was a 76% seasonal decline. During midsummer, the drop reached 82%. These were not farms or cities. These were protected nature reserves. The study, published in PLOS One, became one of the most discussed scientific papers that year, and its pattern has since been confirmed worldwide. A 2020 meta-analysis found terrestrial insect abundance declining at roughly 9% per decade globally. And in 2025, a study from the University of North Carolina tracked flying insect populations across 15 summers in an undisturbed subalpine meadow in the Colorado Rockies and measured a 72% drop over 20 years. Even where humans have barely set foot, the insects are vanishing. Now, let me show you what those missing insects were actually doing in your garden, because this is where the story becomes extraordinary. Start beneath the surface. A single teaspoon of healthy soil contains more living microorganisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and the larger invertebrates that move among them, earthworms, springtails, ground beetles, ants, mites, all working to decompose dead plant material, cycle nitrogen and phosphorus, and build the physical structure that lets water drain and roots breathe. A comprehensive review compiled from nearly 400 studies found that pesticides harmed beneficial soil-dwelling invertebrates in 71% of cases examined. Insecticides alone caused negative effects in roughly 80% of tested endpoints for ground beetles, parasitic wasps, millipedes, centipedes, earthworms, and springtails. These are not pests. These are the organisms keeping your soil alive. Here is the connection that almost no one in the gardening world talks about. Those soil insects are not just decomposing organic matter. They are maintaining the conditions that allow mycorrhizal fungi to function. Mycorrhizal fungi are vast underground networks of fungal filaments that form symbiotic relationships with plant roots. Over 90% of all land plants depend on them to absorb nutrients. The fungi extend a plant's root reach by orders of magnitude, pulling phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals from soil the roots alone could never access. Mycorrhizal networks reduce nutrient leaching from rainfall by as much as 50% and help plants resist both drought and disease. But these fungal networks need aerated, structurally intact soil to spread. They need the tunnels earthworms dig, the channels beetle larvae bore, the microarchitecture that springtails and mites create as they move through the top layers. When soil insects vanish, the soil compacts, the fungal highways collapse, and the plants above lose access to the nutrient exchange system they evolved to depend on. Your garden does not just lose its bugs. It loses its underground supply chain. Move above the surface. 75% of the world's food crop types depend at least in part on insect pollinators. That figure comes directly from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Insect pollinators contribute to roughly 35% of global crop production by volume, improving yields of 87 out of 115 major food crops. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services estimates the annual value of global pollination services at between $235 billion and $577 billion. In the United States alone, insect pollination adds over $34 billion in value to agricultural crops each year. When you look at your squash blossoms and see no bees, no hoverflies, no solitary bees nesting in bare soil patches, you are not looking at a clean garden. You are looking at a pollination failure already in progress. This is where the story gets personal. A landmark study published in Science in 2019 by a team led by Ken Rosenberg at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology found that North America has lost nearly 3 billion birds since 1970, a 29% decline across 529 species. When the researchers broke the data by diet, the pattern was devastating. More than 90% of the total bird loss came from species that depend on insects during at least part of their annual cycle. Insect-eating species declined by 2.9 billion individuals over 50 years. Species that do not rely on insects actually gained population. Entomologist Doug Tallamy at the University of Delaware has documented exactly how fragile this chain is. A single pair of Carolina chickadees requires between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of chicks. Both parents take turns bringing a caterpillar to the nest every 3 minutes, from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, for 16 to 18 days straight. That is, 350 to 570 caterpillars per day. Baby songbirds cannot survive on seeds. They need the protein and fat that only soft-bodied insects provide. Tallamy documented a case where a brood of chickadees died in the nest because there were not enough caterpillars in the surrounding landscape. Inside that nest, researchers found uneaten sunflower seeds. The parents had tried. The chicks could not eat them. Let that settle for a moment. The silence in a bug-free garden is not peace. It is a food chain breaking. Here is what you should actually do. First, stop using broad-spectrum insecticides, especially any product containing neonicotinoid compounds like imidacloprid, clothianidin, or thiamethoxam. These systemic chemicals are absorbed into every tissue of a treated plant, including its pollen and nectar. Imidacloprid can persist in soil for over 5 years. Untreated plants growing in that contaminated soil the following season absorb the residue through their roots and carry it into new flowers. Products approved for home and garden use can be applied at concentrations up to 32 times higher than those used in commercial agriculture. The spray on the shelf at your local hardware store can be more toxic to pollinators than what is used on industrial farmland. Second, plant native species. Tallamy's research showed that a single native white oak supported 140 caterpillars from 19 different species, while a non-native ornamental tree of similar size hosted exactly one. Third, leave the leaf litter. Dead leaves and hollow stems are not mess. They are overwintering habitat for ground beetles, lacewing larvae, and solitary bees. Fourth, if you see holes in your leaves, do not reach for anything. That damage is evidence your garden is part of a functioning ecosystem. A few chewed leaves are not a crisis. They are proof the system is working. The next time you step outside and notice that your garden is perfectly still, that nothing is moving between the flowers or crossing the soil, do not smile. Wonder where they went. Because a garden full of insects is not a garden with a problem. It is a garden with a future. Have you noticed fewer insects in your garden over the past few years? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And this is exactly the kind of story this community was built for. This is 6 Legs Deep. I will see you in the next one. And if you have ever noticed a strange, papery structure clinging to the underside of your porch roof and thought about tearing it down, the next video will change your mind about what is being built inside it.